Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5345, the American Leadership in Space Technology and Advanced Rocketry Act, also known as the ALSTAR Act.
Does the gentleman move to pass the bill as amended?
Does the gentleman move to pass the bill as amended?
Yes, sir.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 5345, a bill to designate the Marshall Space Flight Center of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration to provide leadership for the U.S. rocket propulsion industrial base and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. VEASEY, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to raise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material in H.R. 5345, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as the Congressman for the Tennessee Valley of the state of Alabama, I am uniquely situated to appreciate the valuable contribution the Marshall Space Flight Center has made and continues to make to America's rocket propulsion capabilities. As a child growing up in Huntsville, Alabama, I well remember the 1960s as nearby Saturn V rocket engine tests shook the ground and rattled the windows. I also remember the great pride in America I felt the moment Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon after leaving the Earth on one of our Saturn V rockets. No doubt about it, developing and improving rocket propulsion is essential to Americans' leadership in space exploration and national security. And it has been the Marshall Space Flight Center that has provided and continues to provide the cutting-edge expertise America needs in both solid and liquid rocket propulsion. Over the last several years, America has witnessed a resurgence in the rocket propulsion industry as traditional and emerging actors move forward. It is important that the federal government minimize expensive duplication and support healthy cooperation and communication between the private sector and federal government to promote America's robust rocket propulsion industry. With President Trump's establishment of Space Force as an independent branch of the military, rocket propulsion is recognized as even more important to securing America's future than ever before because America's military relies heavily on its space assets, global positioning satellites being but one example, to protect our national security. As Congress guides America's national space policy, we must promote the robust rocket propulsion industrial base that is essential to our space presence. My bill, H.R. 5345, the American Leadership in Space Technology and Advanced Rocketry Act of 2018, commonly known as the ALSTAR Act, helps ensure the long-term stability of the rocket propulsion industry through better coordination and collaboration between all relevant stakeholders, public and private. Specifically, the ALSTAR Act formally designates Marshall Space Flight Center as NASA's current and future lead center for rocket propulsion. In addition, the ALSTAR Act directs Marshall to explore, develop, and mature new rocket propulsion technology in cooperation with partners across and outside of government. This new emphasis, while building on a strong foundation, helps to ensure that America remains at the forefront of space exploration. Mr. Speaker, in the 1940s and 1950s, voyages to the moon were thought impossible. But America rose to the challenge and overcame the impossible. Today, America must once again challenge itself to reach far beyond its limits. Through our increased attention, focus, and support of the utilization of space and the exploration of deep space, we, too, can overcome the impossible and help inspire the next generation of Americans to look to the stars and go where no one has gone before. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alabama reserves. The gentleman from Texas recognized. Your gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I support a robust and innovative space industry. I also believe that is very important that we leverage the investments taxpayers have allowed the nation to make in its facilities and workforce. The bill before us today that is known as H.R. 5345, also known as the American Leadership in Space Technology and Advanced Rocketry Act, recognizes the rocket propulsion work of the Marshall Space Flight Center and that center's role in helping to develop the next generation of rocket propulsion capabilities. The Marshall Center has a long and storied history in rocket development, dating back to the huge Saturn V rockets that powered our astronauts to the moon, and that tradition continues to this day. I support moving this bill out of the House floor. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Lamar Smith.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Vice Chairman of the Space Subcommittee for yielding me time, and I appreciate all that Mr. Brooks has done, the gentleman from Alabama, for space exploration and for space flight. The House Science, Space, and Technology Committee has demonstrated time and again that U.S. leadership in space is a bipartisan activity. The scientists, engineers, and technicians at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, have for more than half a century led the world in the development of rocket propulsion. H.R. 5345, the American Leadership in Space Technology and Advanced Rocketry Act, recognizes the impressive accomplishments of Marshall, as well as the vital ongoing work they continue to do to ensure continued American leadership in space technology and rocketry capabilities. As our future in space looks bolder, bigger, and brighter, I am confident that Marshall will continue to be a reliable, powerful, dependable team player in moving this nation forward. Mr. Speaker, Vice Chairman Brooks has always been a strong and effective advocate for space initiatives and Marshall Space Flight Center. I appreciate all that he has done on this subject, and we very much appreciate his being such a leader on the Science Committee. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Alabama reserves, and the
Yes,
gentleman
sir.
from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama.
I meant most of it. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brian Babin.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor and it's a privilege to work with with Representative Mo Brooks on the Space Subcommittee, advancing our nation's priorities and doing our part to ensure strong leadership in America's space program. Mo, I want to thank you for this important bill. You're a true champion of Marshall Space Flight Center, the center's employees, and the important work that they do every day to keep America first in space. The excitement and the enthusiasm about our government and the private space activities has been building toward a fever pitch. The fine scientists, engineers, and technicians at Marshall Space Flight Center have for more than half a century led the world in the development of rocket propulsion. This bill recognizes the impressive accomplishments of Marshall, as well as the vital ongoing work that they continue to do to ensure continued American leadership in space. And I'm very proud to have worked on and co-sponsored this legislation with my colleague, Mr. Brooks. As our future in space looks bolder and brighter, I'm confident that the Marshall Space Flight Center will continue to be a reliable, powerful, dependable team player in moving this nation forward. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama reserved. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of my
Gentleman
time.
reserved. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests at this time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5345 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rule